Hello and welcome to Overlanders Then and Now. I'm Jim King, joined as always by my co host, fellow traveler, and friend, Tom Bingle.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here. Doc, where are we, by the way?
Well, I'm in Connecticut, you're in Boston, but
Yeah.
yeah, the last time we were together on video, we were finishing up our reflections on coming back to the
Yeah.
States. Yeah, I
Hmm.
came back earlier. You stayed a couple months working and traveling more around Europe. So today I'm going to interview you about what you did between the time you got home and the
Yeah.
time we
Mhm.
eventually met up again in Cairo, Egypt, of all places.
Amazing, Jimmy, that we
Yeah,
just sort of looked at a map and decided on Cairo, isn't it?
yeah, it's
Um,
amazing.
but when we decided, Jim, to hit the road again, it turned out that you wanted to have a bit more time to see more of Europe before going on to that overland route from Istanbul to Kathmandu, Jim.
Yeah, yeah, Spain especially. I wanted to go back and check out
Mm-hmm.
more of that. But hey, this is all about you today. So
Okay,
so
yeah.
let's get to it. Now, when we last spoke about you coming home, you said that on that very first day you were home, you told your mother that you might head out again. Yeah, was that really a might, or had you already made up your mind?
Well, Jimmy, it was so funny because I had heard on kind of the trickling home, all right, that I had three, close buds that were Peace Corps volunteers. Now,
Okay.
two were in West Africa, one in Malaysia, and the
Hmm.
Malaysia, ooh. All right, then Jim and I know I had that good friend that I met in Istanbul from Australia that, so, ooh, I started to put it together. And Jimmy, I'll never forget also in Schwabing, the kind of the university district there in Munich, that graduate student talking,
Oh
going
yeah.
on about Istanbul to Kathmandu. And so Jim and Doc, the other thing is, I just also was saying, damn, Jimmy and I did it. We really put it together and we accomplished a lot and we can do this and that it's not so, frightening so much. Jim and I can do it. And Jimmy, life is a journey. Life is a journey. And any event, we got to keep our eyes on the prize. And so, yes, Doc, I was putting that together.
So going overland was definitely the prize for both of us. And it sounds like
Yeah.
your Peace Corps friends were
Uh,
a motivating factor. But so were there any other reasons for choosing Africa?
Well, Jimmy, Africa, the one thing was, Jim, we hardly met anybody, any backpackers, so there was a novelty, heading down to Africa in that
Oh
sense.
yeah, right.
And Jimmy, I'm going to revert back to my fifth grade geography, Mrs. McGuire, and I remember
Oh
opening up
geez.
that chapter on Africa. It was so different than any other place, nothing
Yeah.
compared to it. It was so unusual. And Jimmy, you know what? Also, then just the concept of moving forward. All right. I know, Jimmy, that we would have some trials and that would lead to growth, lead to some development with those journeys to a someplace unusual in
Yeah.
that regard.
Yeah. And we definitely eventually came to some very unusual places. And I remember how both of us were a little apprehensive the first time
Oh,
when we
yeah.
left from
Hmm.
Cleveland to London. Were you more confident this time around? You must have been since you were flying
Uh,
to a very different continent than Europe.
yeah, but Jimmy, falling into Africa, I was by myself. Do you know what I mean,
Mhm.
Jim? And I
Right.
was thinking, ooh, here's another big step. Okay. And Doc, I'll never forget going into JFK, from Detroit again, leaving,
Hmm.
and that little bit of international flair. And JFK kind of, ooh, all right, kind of soften it a little bit.
Yeah.
And then on to Amsterdam. And then, Jimmy, I was on Suriname Airlines heading down to Casablanca before into Freetown. But I have
Wow.
to admit, this is what the road brings, Jim. The seatmate on going over the Atlantic was Deb, a Dutch girl having some problems, and as she was facing going back home, and so
Hmm.
she and I together kind of lifted each other's spirit a little bit to go and face then the next challenge, and that's what the road brings, Jim. The road
Wow.
brings those moments.
Oh, it sounds like a little mutual therapy at 30,000 feet.
Yeah,
But I'm guessing your
yeah, Jim.
arrival in Sierra Leone, I'm guessing that was different than
Oh,
your previous arrival in London when we had the luxury of being
yeah.
greeted and carted about, by my Air Force brother.
Yeah, Jimmy, no fog, no fog. And Jimmy, but it was so great, Jim. Just a little bit of a lack of confidence. I was hoping Carl, my Peace Corps buddy in Sierra
Right.
Leone, would be there. He couldn't make the airport. And so, however,
Mm.
Jim, he had alluded to the time in customs and baggage claim as a little bit of a riot. It's a crazy period of time. So my first impression, Jim, here we go. I'm going in there being a gentleman comes up, not out of, looking for money or anything. He says, help. And Jimmy, helps me through all that chaos. It was just amazing. His name was
Really?
Richard. And Jimmy, he was so friendly. And whenever he talked, it's funny. He always had a smile on his face as he was talking. So that
But he
was
did.
my
He
first
didn't.
impression, Jimmy.
Yeah, but he didn't want anything like that tip,
No, Jim,
some
no,
bucksheesh.
Bashi. No, Jimmy,
Uh,
no, believe it or not, not a thing. And
wow.
so, Jim, that was a nice introduction to Africa. And then I have to admit that knowing that, I'd be meeting up with, Carl in Sierra Leone and Steve in Ghana, that would give me more strength to move forward, let's get on with the show now, because then that first impression was over. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, how about a quick? I know it's going to be tough for you. I think our viewers know it as
Yeah.
well, but a quick overview of the countries you visited. Go for it.
Fascinating. Sierra Leone, Ghana, and Kenya. And Jimmy, all three were British colonies, part of the British
Hmm.
colonial system. Sierra Leone, Jim, had a peaceful transition, to independence back in 1961, founded originally by, British abolitionists. But Jimmy, it was a softer climate. It was warmer, but then a lot of rain. Agriculture was easier there. It wasn't such a struggle. And it just seemed
Yeah.
the people had enough food, Jim, and it just, I don't know, the people were friendly in that sense. So that was a little bit of Sierra Leone. Then over
Okay.
to Ghana. And Ghana, was the first sub-Saharan African country to reach independence, back in 57. It had been ruled, by the British all the way back to the 1890s. But Jimmy, the Ghanaian people were dynamic. They even had self-government, even, in stages. So they were just more, how would I call it? Just more take control of matters and different things of that nature. That was very good. However,
Okay.
Jim, it did lead to a lot of people being in Accra, the capital city, and it just seemed, Ghana, as opposed to Sierra Leone, was wound up more. It was more intense, more, just more pickles and more people around it. Just a little tighter, wound up, there than what was Sierra Leone, Jimmy, in that
Okay.
sense.
All right.
And
So
then,
go
yeah,
ahead. We're
and
after
then Jimmy
Ghana.
from Ghana, then on to Kenya, and then Jim,
Oh,
that was
Kenya.
like excuse me, Jimmy, unbelievable, Jim, because Kenya was like, the jewel in the crown, modern skyscrapers, great transportation system. Now their independence, however, Doc, was famous because of a famous uprising called the Mau Mau, uprising, which then led to independence. So it was a more violent transition there as opposed to the other two countries. However, by far, on appearance, Kenya was much more quote unquote successful, much more Western than the other two in that sense, Doc. So,
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Professor. Well, you obviously packed a lot of travel into a
yeah.
single month. But what do you remember most about your African adventure from your month over there in those three
Jimmy,
countries?
it was such a hard life, because we were up
Mm.
in the upcountry it's closer to the land, and that's where people made most of, their living is from agriculture, but very difficult, and can't compare anything to the United States to that. It's just amazing. And
Hmm.
Jimmy, also another interesting thing was the role of women in all three countries, that they really, seem to keep the fabric together, and, the values and family life. It was really quite interesting,
Well,
in that regard.
that's always been
Yeah.
true, hasn't it? Women tend to be the glue holding things together, right?
God, Jimmy, wait, Doc, is Joanne listening in? Jimmy, or, but
Just making
but
sure.
but seriously, Jimmy, Africa, and as I said, women, it seemed like from the moment they're born until they pass, it's just such a vital role. They had
Yeah.
beautiful colors, of their clothing was just so brilliant.
Hmm.
And friendliness, and that was also interesting, Jim. Again, in one of those odd areas where, okay, being an American, ooh. That's curious because we don't see many Americans. Now, the Peace Corps volunteers kind of broke a little bit of that, but no, they don't see Americans normally up in the upcountry at all.
Well, back
Jimmy,
then.
other general things, there was a wealthy class of like 5%, and then the 95% were getting by, you know. And I also have to admit, Jim, that Carl and Steve, oh my gosh, for representing the United States, they were outstanding as Peace Corps volunteer because, Doc, they had a fascinating role. They were both, had a little medical background, but here's what they were doing, Jim. They were introducing elementary Western medical practices to the people that are dominant as far as quote unquote in the medical world up in the country and in these lands, the African healers, the traditional African healers. And so it was phenomenal. It was wonderful, Jim, because it wasn't like, oh, our Western ways are so much better than what you, no, It was a mixture trying to bridge it because they knew that the people respected these traditional healers. Unbelievable in the culture. So it's really quite something, Jimmy, in that
Okay.
way.
Yeah, that
Really
sounds
amazing.
good. Yeah, I want to ask you more about that, but you said a second ago something about the wealthy class being, the top
Mhm.
5% and the rest, just getting by. Just to add a little snarky comment, that sounds like America today. So, anyway, moving on what we were talking about. Oh, the traditional healers. Tell
Yeah.
us more about that. I think you had mentioned at one time that you were actually witnessed or were part of some sort of
Yes,
session.
Jim.
Okay.
Yep. Very faint, very interesting. Now, Jimmy, a fetish priest, you ready, Doc, is a spiritual healer, but what's fascinating, in the West African religions, obviously like Ghana, but Jimmy, they act as a bridge between the living and the spiritual world. They perform rituals in a spiritual manner, divining, fortunes of people, but they also are very much involved in solving community and individual problems, day-to-day things. And so during the ceremony, traditionally, when you're in their shrines, they have a fetish, and a fetish is an inanimate object. And this one shrine I went was like a large, in the shape of a bullet made out of wood. It had cowrie shells for eyes. But Jimmy, they believe that, that fetish then is a conversation and they have spiritual powers. So it's
Okay.
really quite something.
All
Yeah.
right. All right. Yeah. Important to make that. Most people don't think of a fetish in that way. So you're saying it's a
All right.
inanimate object, like what did you say? A
Yeah, like a
big
large
bullet?
size of a bullet,
Okay.
and I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it was just large. And again, Jimmy, when I went, see, this was so unique because I with Steve, we were going around. We did this day. We visited 11 traditional healers, kind of introduced, and getting, Steve being
Okay.
an expert at it. This one we went into, Jim, the last one, here we go. A woman was possessed, coming into the shrine, the first shrine, and rolling on the ground and
What?
just kind of
Who?
she
A,
was
wo- a
well
woman?
she had lost her her husband, and she was
Uh,
there with the spiritual to kind of get some solace and whatever. And then Jimmy, the next thing in the next shrine, sure enough, here's a little boy that's not feeling well, and he brought a chicken in for the fetish priest then to sacrifice it over the fetish and to see
wow.
what might be telling there. And unfortunately, the way that the chicken died, the legs were down below, and that wasn't a good sign. The fetish priest had mentioned it to it, and
Wow.
so I don't know. It was just fascinating. And Jimmy, it seemed like there was always communication between this fetish priest and the fetish, and the fetish voice coming back was like a yellow ducky voice. And so, and Jim,
Wait a minute. Wait,
Jimmy just
this
being there. No,
inanimate, wait a minute. Wait a
yes.
minute. Wait. So you're saying this inanimate object spoke back?
Jimmy, the way that it was coming across, it was, it sounded like that. It wasn't like, I was looking at the fetish priest, and it wasn't like he was moving his lips or anything. It was just incredible. And
Well, that's
Jim, the
bizarre.
final moment, we get into the final shrine. This was like the fourth shrine, and I felt, that I might be highlighted in some way of this. And so, sure enough, the fetish priest, there's another fetish there. Goes and comes to me. And here's Steve, fortunately there, and do you believe in, in the native language? But he says, do you believe in the fetish? And I looked at Steve and whatever, it was just to kind of diplomatically, whatever, we nodded or whatever. And then he says, he didn't believe me, and he took a stick, Jim. He took a stick, and he
Yeah.
says, if I hit you, you shall die.
Yeah.
And then he said, "Do you believe in the fetish? Do you believe in the fetish?" And I only responded, "I did not want to die."
Oh my God. So
Yeah,
what happened?
I didn't die, Doc. So, unbelievable.
Uh, okay. All right. Well, that's, you know, what I find maybe most, well, not most interesting, that's fascinating, but it's kind of interesting that in all the years since that time and in all the times we've gotten together, you never told me about these
Yeah, yeah,
incidents
yeah.
or, even where you were in Africa after all this time. So
Yeah,
it's very interesting. So anyway,
yeah,
in
fascinating.
in keeping with the Overlanders then and now theme, what are some of your now reflections on that time in Africa? When you,
Jimmy, good thing. Yeah, Jimmy, I'm grateful for, over the last, 48 years, Jimmy, I'm so grateful for what I have,
Mhm.
because Africa is so hard and people trying to make the most, it's very commendable, but they're trying to make the most. And Doc, it was very hard for them. Another item, which was fascinating, and again, really that time what Steve and Carl brought out, the cooperation. Here was, kind of the big governments in Freetown and Accra working with the traditional healers up in the country. And they really kind of respected each other, but they wanted to make it better for the people. To have some, more elementary, Western practices mixed in. And Jimmy, then the other thing is that the overall universal is that people experience the same human problems that we do. They all are striving to improve their world. They all, they stress on, meeting the basic needs. It's like the basic, things and raising children, deciding what work they do, and even romance, Jim. And so, it kind of let me, we need to respect, everybody's individual journey
Hmm.
on this planet. So it's really quite excellent in that way that have
Yeah.
stayed with me.
And an excellent insight too. So, well, since it is such an excellent insight, maybe we should stop there before one of us says something less inspiring. Uh, so to all of you watching or listening, thanks for joining us. And I'm this time I'm going to leave it to Binks to sign
Oh.
off in one or more of the African ways. Binks, take it away.
Are you ready, Jimmy? Okay, here's goodbye in the Creole, Krio in Sierra Leone.
Okay.
You say goodbye, Adego.
Adigo.
Okay?
Okay.
Now here's goodbye in Ghana, the Twi language, Nante Yia. And then here's goodbye in
Yankee.
Swahili over in Kenya. You ready? Kwaheri.
Kwaheri.
So, Jim, there we go. Adego, Nate Yi, and Kwaheri.